It bothers me when she responds to my questions with new questions without thinking about them. Regardless of the question or the answer, she always replies with another question. This happens in any situation. For instance, when I ask Megan about her dinner, she responds, "Or maybe about what I cooked." Similarly, when I asked her where she wanted to move the chair, she replied, "Where did I say I wanted to put it?" No matter the topic, she consistently answers my questions with new questions. However, there was one exception. The last question I asked her was the only time she couldn't respond with another question. I wonder what kind of question it was. It consisted of 6 simple words, accompanied by a questioning intonation. But the most challenging question to answer was, "Why did I decide to stay?" This question left her without a response. Unfortunately, I already knew she wouldn't be able to answer it. Cheaters are never capable of this. They may give intricate explanations, but deep down they understand the truth. The challenge is to help them recognize this. From the start, I should have anticipated this outcome. My marriage was troublesome from the beginning. I should have heeded my father's advice and followed the 8 principles he believed a man should adhere to. The first is that life is pleasant as long as you don't complicate it. The second is that work becomes difficult only when you lack motivation. Third, to understand what your wife will look like in 20 years, observe her mother. Fourth, a woman needs a lot of effort not to turn into her mother. Fifth, friends can come and go, but real friends stay forever. Sixth, it is advisable not to give all your money to your spouse. The seventh is that the deceived person does not deserve half, regardless of what the judge says. Eighth, physical attractiveness decreases over time, but true beauty persists. My father always said that if my mother disappeared, her purse would remain. It could mean she ran away or he chased her. In the latter case, her purse likely remained since he didn't give her anything. Dad always spoke loudly enough for Mom to hear him. He often said, "Son, she will leave this marriage with only what she came with and nothing more." I've always wondered what could cause such hatred in a person. It was one of life's lessons that I realized later. And now about the new one. I've never been inclined to share my life story, so I won't delve into it here. But I'll state its essence. My name is Henry. I was born in North Texas into a loving family. True, my father had a tendency to snap at me regardless of whether I deserved it or not. Fortunately, my mother was the mainstay who supported our family. Next to me were my sisters Kelly and Ann, as well as my younger brother Carlton. And then there was Megan. I first met Megan in the 8th grade. Her beauty immediately captivated me, and it was like love at first sight. But it wasn't until our sophomore year of college that we became a couple. If you're interested in finding out the reason for this delay, ask her father. This man felt sharp anger whenever anyone approached his daughter and behaved like a protective hound. It took 3 long years before he let me sit on the porch of their house, and another year before he let me talk to her on the phone. It seemed to me all the time that he was eavesdropping as he sharply shouted no before she had time to ask if she could talk to me. So you can imagine my surprise when I plucked up the courage and asked him for permission to marry Megan. To my surprise, he agreed and even called me son. 6 years have passed since then. Once I was considered a fool, feeble-minded and uneducated, and now I have become his son. My path in married life was far from boring, especially when Megan was next to me. Despite the difficulties we faced over the next 15 years, we managed to find the strength and happiness. We worked, rested, shared private moments, and were happy when we had 3 precious children, Tommy, Jessica, and Paul. Our little darlings brought great joy into our lives, but it was in the 25th year of our life together that everything collapsed. The only reason I didn't dare to leave the country was the thought that I would leave our children there. 2 of the 3 children had already left home, and the 3rd was preparing to leave. Tommy attended Florida State University, Jessica enrolled in Knoxville, and Paul had recently graduated from high school and was going to continue his education in Gainesville as a proud student. As a young man, Paul decided to celebrate the last night spent at home with a grand party. Unfortunately, he made a rash decision to drive under the influence of drinks, which led to a collision with a pole and subsequent hospitalization. After hearing the news, Megan and I rushed to the hospital. Paul's lung was badly damaged, and he urgently needed a kidney transplant. His own kidneys were badly damaged, so he desperately needed a suitable donor. The doctor asked for permission to conduct a blood test to determine if I was suitable. Megan was looking at us with a puzzled expression on her face, as if she was trying to understand something. Suddenly she said, "Don't bother. He's not Paul's father." Shocked, I took a step back and stared at her. Instinctively, I reached out to grab her, but the doctor intervened, urging me not to act impulsively. Feeling lost and needing answers, I asked Megan for an explanation. The doctor stepped in, suggesting she bring Paul's father to help. I felt down, turned away, and started to leave, but a sudden change of mood made me stop and go back. I tossed my wedding ring on the floor and entered the room. It occurred to me that he might not be my son, but what mattered most was getting him the necessary help. When Megan and the doctor entered, I instinctively turned away and left. The doctor firmly grabbed my hand, convincing me to stay, emphasizing that at this critical moment Paul needed both of us involuntarily. I agreed and stayed by his side. As night fell, Paul's father joined us. An hour later, my brother Carlton, who seemed aware of the situation, arrived. Just as I was about to explain, I noticed that Paul had already received blood. It was unsettling since Paul's father was Megan's brother-in-law, Carlton, my own brother. Then the doctor, Megan, and he left the room. At that moment, I found my answer. Carlton came in, tried to explain, but I couldn't take it anymore. Depressed, I left the ward, unable to cope. In the waiting room, I noticed Abby, Carlton's wife, crying. I couldn't figure out if it was about Paul's condition or the shocking discovery of Carlton and Megan. Ultimately, it didn't matter. Both issues were incredibly complex. A doctor approached, stressing the importance of being there for Paul and Megan, urging me to be strong. I understood that they would need my help. Curiously, I asked what steps needed to be taken to fulfill this role. I asked, "What should I do? How can I provide support in this difficult situation?" To my surprise, she confessed, "In fact, my son is my nephew. She had an affair with my brother for an unknown time, although it has been at least 18 years since Paul was born." Gripped by these facts, I wondered how to behave with Carlton. Now, I can't call him my brother anymore. Which brother or sister would commit such a betrayal, leaving their children to be raised by another? In search of advice, I turned to a man who called himself a doctor, hoping he could comfort me. Maybe they can prescribe something to help me cope with this situation. I even asked if there were special glasses for detecting signs of infidelity. Is there any hope for reconciliation after treason? I desperately need to cut my brother out of my life. Perhaps you have a solution to erase these memories from my mind. No, wait, I doubt it very much. So please leave me alone and focus on helping Paul. My marriage and my life do not depend on your help. The doctor sighed disapprovingly, then turned on his heel and returned to Paul's room. I went up to Abby and asked her what Carlton had told her. She told me that all 3 of my children are his children. In shock, I asked how Megan could have known about my alleged infertility. After all, I have been to the hospital only once. And then, at the age of 10, I wanted to find out the truth, and I urgently needed to reveal it. It wasn't until 11:30 the next morning that the doctor finally informed us that Paul would be fine. It turned out that Carlton's kidney was perfect. As I headed for the exit, Megan and the doctor hurriedly approached me. Just as the door was closing, Meg tried to reach out to me, but the doctor intervened and prevented her from doing so. Megan asked where I was going and started worrying about our son Paul. It was very painful for me to hear her call him our son. Without saying a word, I turned away and left. When I drove up to the house, it was already about 2:30 in the afternoon. After visiting Home Depot and buying a couple of sets of locks, I started changing the locks in the house. Having started collecting Megan's clothes, I managed to fill 4 bags before an unexpected call rang. It turned out to be her father who wanted to come and talk to me before I took any drastic action. I couldn't help but doubt his suspicions. "Come on, Dad," I replied. "What reasons can I have to do something?" Without waiting for his answer, I abruptly ended the conversation. As I continued to pack Megan's things, I kept thinking about Paul and everything that had happened between us. Memories of our long conversations in psychology classes suddenly came flooding back to me. Nature versus nurture. Did DNA determine my son's gender? Deep down, I always believed that he was mine. Every step from his first steps to catching a soccer ball, from his first fight to the first date and the first kiss. All these precious moments strengthened our bond, didn't they? But when Paul really needed a father figure, I failed. When he needed blood and a kidney, which I would have willingly given him, I couldn't. At the most critical moment, when he needed help, I was helpless because Megan turned out to be unfaithful. When the doctor said the words, "He needs a kidney," it was as if my son had ceased to be mine. Of course, our surname will remain, but what will happen to my own branch on the family tree? It will just wither. While the Carlton branch flourished, having 7 descendants, 4 children by Abby and 3 by Megan, which made him the epitome of a family stud, thoughts about all this began to overwhelm me, causing a throbbing headache. Feeling overwhelmed and needing a break, I went to the fridge. Absently, I grabbed a beer and sank into my favorite chair. When I turned on the TV, the sound of approaching cars grabbed my attention. Unmindful, I stayed put, holding onto a beer and lost in my thoughts. As persistent knocking echoed, I realized a group of 4 or 5 people awaited outside. After about 10 minutes, Megan finally showed up, trying to use a key her father had told her to unlock the door. However, their surprise was evident when the key failed. After finishing my beer, I opened the door. Curious, I asked my father why they had come. My father, taking on a representative role, asked if they could come in and talk. Agreeing, I insisted that Carlton and Megan stay behind. Meanwhile, Megan sat on the porch, tears flowing. They realized their expectations wouldn't be met. Over the next 2 hours, they spilled everything. Everyone except Abby and me already knew the truth. It was hard to believe these people were my relatives. Abby sympathized with Megan's emotions. Ironically, my father, who had imparted wisdom on navigating infidelity, now encouraged me to come to terms with my wife's unfaithfulness. He conveyed that becoming a grandparent had altered his perspective and justified Megan's actions for the sake of the family I desired. Despite his explanation, I struggled to accept it and was on the verge of giving up. Contemplating the situation, I found myself questioning why society deemed it acceptable for a woman to actively pursue a child, whereas a man faced different expectations when his wife couldn't conceive. It appeared that only women were permitted to deviate from societal norms, with men seemingly exempt from the need for families where they could witness the growth of a child in their partner's womb. The idea that I shouldn't feel pain during this period challenged the stereotypical definition of a man. Amid the chaos and senseless talk about prioritizing children and maintaining a single family, I felt out of place. Overwhelmed by thoughts that women without the ability to conceive were deemed too emotional and without hope, I grappled with the added pressure of society associating supposed blessings with a muscular physique. Unable to contain my frustration, I demanded that everyone leave. The truth, however, lay in the revelation that she had cheated on me and had children with my brother. Reflecting on whether this was considered a blessing, I found myself reevaluating my beliefs. To my surprise, I discovered that my mother had shared this information with her, shedding light on my inability to have children due to contracting yellow fever at age 10. Megan, surprisingly, had known but chose not to disclose it to me. It was disheartening to realize the kind of mother she turned out to be. After finally getting the kids sent away, they unexpectedly returned an hour later. Apparently, Megan called them, telling them to go to her parents first, but they decided to return home. I spent the next hour explaining the situation without holding back any details. Jessica found it hard to believe and immediately ordered a DNA test, planning to confront Megan. Tommy reassured me that it didn't matter because I would always be his father, regardless of the results. Despite his doubts, he reluctantly agreed to carry out Jessica's plan to find out the truth. The next day, we all went to the hospital. First, we visited Paul to check his condition, then started taking blood. While Jessica went to Megan's, Tommy and I took turns looking after Paul for several hours. Eventually, we returned home with a sense of finality in the air. Every day, tension in the house grew more palpable. On the 3rd day, the hospital called with the long-awaited results. Jessica is the only one with my bloodline. This discovery cleared all doubts about my fertility. Stunned by the news, Tommy left the room abruptly, his emotions too strong to contain. Apparently, Megan had been unfaithful since the 2nd year of our marriage. Less than 2 years later, she became pregnant with Tommy after just 18 months. Upon receiving the DNA results confirming my suspicions, I immediately filed for divorce. I handed the results to my lawyer, determined to get everything I deserve and not settle for a 50-50 split. I firmly believe in equality of rights. Society usually demands justice and material retribution when a man cheats, urging the injured party to take everything possible. When a man becomes a participant of infidelity, the reaction is often doubtful, with questions like, "What did you do wrong?" Instead of divorce, seeking professional help is suggested. After the shocking revelation, I lost many friends, including parents and relatives who were aware of the ongoing situation. In our final meeting, Megan requested 30 minutes alone, a moment encompassing 25 years of marriage, with 23 years of infidelity spanning several months. Though I don't keep track, I couldn't tolerate another lie. Even in our last meeting, every sentence felt like a question. Megan asked if I thought she had been a good wife, if I missed anything, and questioned our mutual love. She even asked if I seriously considered leaving. It was hard for me to comprehend. Finally, I asked her one question she couldn't answer, summarizing the events of the last 2 years of our marriage in the next 10 minutes. Turning to Megan, I asked why I should even think about staying. Without waiting for an answer, I got up and left. The divorce was finalized in 90 days, without alimony or child support from me. Megan ended up paying me $350 per month for 5 years. The house was given to Jessica, allowing me to live in it rent-free. Financially, I had no job or salary. The day before I got the DNA test results, I decided to quit, as Megan had been cheating for over 20 years. It seemed unfair for the judge to force me to support her infidelities. Currently, I have no funds in my bank account, using them to cover Paul's medical expenses. Out of nowhere, Abby brought unexpected news. My parents, along with Megan and Carlton, planned to reunite our fragmented family. Despite the circumstances, Abby and I spent the next 3 hours strategizing and having fun together. However, our efforts were in vain, as during their intended visit, Paul, Tommy, and I were supposed to go on a cruise. Returning from the cruise, Jessica informed me that my lawyer was ready to sue Carlton for 23 years of non-payment of alimony, demanding $350,000 for each child. When the trial began, Abby immediately demanded a divorce. Officially, I never adopted Paul or Tommy, but they recognized me as their father, not connected by blood ties, but by an attachment formed due to my constant presence. 10 years have passed, and at 62, I'm taking care of 5 and 10-year-old children. My wife Abby, 52, is still with me. Despite using Carlton's alimony for my children's well-being, revenge was never my motive for marrying Abby. The manifestation of our relationship with the Carltons doesn't bother me. Megan once said she'd wait indefinitely to get back at me, but even Jessica finds it amusing. My parents urged Jessica and Abby to convince me to visit them before they die, thinking I'll regret not being there. However, that's unlikely. They're already 80 and 82, and they have Carlton to keep them company.
All right, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned, and let's dive in.
I first met my wife in 1994, and our shared love for Tupac Shakur's music brought us together. Our connection was built on this common interest in rap, even though neither my family nor hers had a liking for it. They preferred classical, country, and jazz. Our paths crossed at a Tupac Shakur concert in Milwaukee more than 29 years ago. We happened to be next to each other, spending the entire evening chatting between performances. Before parting, we exchanged pager numbers, and she shared her phone number and dorm room in our shared dormitory, where the phone was shared by everyone on the corridor. Looking back on how we met, I realize I should have understood her character based on that experience. There was a moment at the concert when women were invited to dance on stage. Although I can't recall the name of the performing group, I distinctly remember selecting some girls backstage while others were asked to leave. When the organizers invited the girls to take the stage, my wife Tony, her real name, shouted with delight, "Choose me! Choose me!" We both knew what usually happens behind the scenes in such situations, being 22 years old at the time. It's noteworthy that my father bought the concert tickets as a reward for my excellent college performance in the previous quarter. Despite not fully understanding my love for rap, Tony also faced family misunderstandings due to her passion for rap music conflicting with her strict Catholic upbringing. Unfortunately, she was never chosen among those dancing on stage and occasionally exposing themselves. Personally, I attended the concert to appreciate the music rather than indulge in explicit displays. When Tupac finally came on stage, I immersed myself in the music, enjoying every moment of his performance. Those orchestrating the on-stage dances were members of a local rap group instead of Tupac. Despite this, Tony and I stayed in touch, eventually leading to a date. Luckily, her college was within walking distance of mine, making the trip quite acceptable. Our first date was at the Ponderosa restaurant, and I mention it because it was meant to be a wake-up call. Unfortunately, she exhibited inappropriate behavior by initiating lovemaking in the restroom. We were in a relatively quiet and sparsely populated place at the time, making me ponder the frequency of such behavior on her part. After the incident, she claimed I should consider myself lucky since she doesn't engage in such things with just anyone. That night, I stayed overnight in her dorm, sneaking in unnoticed. The next day, we both decided to skip classes and spent the entire day in a passionate relationship. Her openness, combined with my youthful excitement at the age of 22, made me feel like I was on cloud 9. Afterward, I returned home, reflecting on the incredible experience. But at the same time, the thought lingered. What if she's just a promiscuous girl? Yet the next day, she called me, expressing how much she missed me and dreamed of living together. Unfortunately, I asked her not to let our feelings interfere with our studies. Before I could finish the sentence, she burst into a barrage of curses, accusing me of being no different from the others she has to deal with. Talking about her feelings, she made it clear that, in her opinion, I am no exception. Despite my attempts to assure her of my sincere affection, she used foul language. Disappointed by the constant rough treatment, she abruptly ended the conversation. Desperate to make peace, I tried to contact her several times, but she still did not answer. A whole week passed without communication, and the feeling of uncertainty did not leave me. Considering my next steps, I decided to write to her, hoping to resume communication. Back in the cozy dorm room, I patiently waited for her answer. Finally, after about 30 minutes, she answered me and asked me to call. Hurrying, I quickly ran to the common phone that served all of us. Unfortunately, someone had already occupied it. Approaching him, I politely asked if I could use the phone. To my horror, it turned out to be my former roommate, who rudely replied for me to calm down and wait for my turn. Frustrated, I left, hoping to come back later when the phone was free. After 30 minutes, I returned, but to my disappointment, the former neighbor still occupied the place by the phone. After my failed attempt, I went back to my room. Later in the evening, around 8 o'clock, I decided to try again, but frustratingly, the guy was still engrossed in conversation. Annoyed, I asked him to hurry, but he responded with rude gestures. Realizing I wouldn't get through that evening, I opted to contact her in the morning. On Saturday morning, with no work obligations until noon, I chose to reach out to her. Despite several attempts to call, there was no response. Unable to tolerate it, I decided to page her, but still got no answer. It took another 2 long months before our paths crossed again. It happened on a Sunday while I was bowling with friends in another part of Milwaukee. To my surprise, she was among a group of girls and 2 guys doing the same activity. I took advantage of the moment to approach her, greeting her with a simple hello. In response, she looked at me, her face lighting up with joy. Without hesitation, she rushed to me and hugged me tightly, expressing her delight at our unexpected meeting. "My God," she exclaimed, showing how happy she was to see me. "I can't believe it's really you," she said, wrapping her arms around my neck. She shared that she genuinely missed me, and I took the opportunity to talk about our previous meeting, explaining that she didn't give me the chance to fully explain myself. I suggested that we could continue to meet, emphasizing the importance of not letting it interfere with our studies. It's worth noting that we both skipped classes the day after our first date, and I didn't want it to become a regular occurrence. I wanted to convey this idea honestly to her, and understanding my perspective, she agreed, expressing a desire to maintain a friendly relationship. Over time, our relationship continued to evolve, and we started thinking about a more serious future together. Finally, the day arrived when we both proudly graduated from our colleges in June. We became a close couple, caring for our future together. She moved to the city where I lived, securing a job as a teacher at an elementary school, while I landed a job as a mechanical draftsman. Our lives began to take shape in a surprisingly natural way. When she moved in with me, there was mutual affection between us, and 2 years later, I felt it was time for the next step. I proposed to her, solidifying our love and commitment. In 1997, we hastily got married in a modest ceremony at her church, located an hour away from our families. Shortly before the wedding, she planned a trip with new friends from our apartment building. I never had the desire to arrange a bachelor party or similar celebrations, trusting that she wouldn't do anything reckless during the trip. Until 2002, I had no knowledge of the enjoyable experiences she had during that trip. She insisted on enjoying life beyond the responsibilities of raising our children, clarifying that it didn't involve private relationships or drinking. I agreed, thinking everything was fine. Throughout the 4-day trip, she only called me once, and that was the day before her scheduled return. Intuition told me something was wrong. It wasn't just a feeling of intuition. I felt nauseous and restless the entire time she was away. My parents chalked it up to pre-wedding nerves, but deep down, I sensed that something wasn't right. Fast forward to when our daughter turned 4, and sometimes I regret not having the resilience many modern young people have now. Although I distanced myself from it, the pain resurfaced when I discovered she wasn't my biological daughter. One Christmas, my 12-year-old nephew and his friends persistently approached me, insisting they urgently needed to talk. Reluctantly entering the bedroom after their 5th attempt, I promised not to get angry. They revealed they had some videos, and to my surprise, it was an adult film featuring my wife and her friend Frankie. Frankie turned out to be one of my wife's new acquaintances from our apartment building, living downstairs. Coincidentally, Frankie turned out to be our downstairs neighbor. I asked to turn on the recording, but my nephew's friends started arguing, trying to persuade each other to fast forward, saying that they missed the right scene. It turned out that this was the part when they were on the boat. Finally, they found what they wanted to show me. And here she is. My wife engaged in private activities at the same time she was pregnant. At that moment, despite the fact that friends tried to persuade her to drink, she repeatedly refused. I saw and heard her talking about the guy with the camera. She said she noticed a desire in his trousers and wanted to experience it for herself. Her friends discussed her plans to have closeness with him, and she confirmed that as soon as the cameras were turned off, he would belong to her. I shouted loudly and fearfully, "What in the world?" This scared my nephew, fearing my brother or sister-in-law might catch him watching an adult movie. Despite this, the recording continued. In the video, the person filming asked if my wife was married, and she confirmed. We were officially married at that time. I realized the video was from a bachelorette party, as I recognized her friends in the background. It struck me that we signed the marriage certificate 2 weeks before the official wedding. Returning to the video, I heard my wife express dissatisfaction with me, calling me boring. She admitted wanting a more confident and adventurous man. I urgently asked my nephew to turn off the video and hand it to me. His friends gave me the tape. In the living room, I told my wife it was time to leave. She was bewildered, and I repeated, "Hurry up and pack your things, we're leaving, I won't repeat it." Apologizing to my family, I swiftly took the woman I thought was mine, and we left. In the car, I told her what I saw, but she pretended not to understand, denying any involvement in such a video experiment. Interestingly, on our way home, she suddenly grabbed the tape and threw it out of the car window. I retrieved it, parked in a nearby store's lot, and went back to the car. To my surprise, my wife was crying, and my daughter was sleeping. I asked her why she was so upset, also mentioning that if she's not in the video, it's still a relief. Despite my strong belief that she was in the video, her persistent refusals began to make me doubt. We reached home, and as planned, she put the baby to bed. We agreed to talk later and watch the video together to finally understand her role. While watching, I found a part where she explicitly discussed lovemaking with the person filming. Angry, I returned to the room and saw her peacefully sleeping with our child. Having made up my mind, I woke her and told her I knew she was pretending. Tears flowed, and she cried loudly, seemingly hoping to wake up the child. I insisted she join the viewing to find evidence of her innocence and end the ordeal. Harshly warning of divorce if she refused, she reluctantly left the room and sat on the sofa. Pressing play, it became evident she was in the video. The same hairstyle, voice, and other details matched, but she stubbornly continued to deny her involvement. I looked at her in surprise, expressing my disbelief. I rewound the tape and watched again, including the disturbing content of her insulting me. Despite convincing evidence, she continued to deny involvement. Annoyed, I pointed out that her friends Frankie and Cassandra were present, trying to persuade her to drink. Embarrassed, she confessed that it was Frankie and someone else. Seizing the opportunity, I emphasized that the video captured her telling a complete stranger that she would engage in private activity with him as soon as the camera turned off. Overwhelmed, she began to cry, attempting to apologize. Confused and shocked, I tried to understand my wife's explanation. She claimed not to know what she was thinking and insisted that they made her do it, asserting it was all for the camera and that she was just pretending. Despite her pleas for forgiveness, I felt angry and betrayed. I swiftly grabbed my jacket and keys, deciding to leave. Realizing the gravity of the situation, I acknowledged the need to consult a lawyer and conduct a DNA test to determine my daughter's biological parentage. I shared the unsettling news with my brother, making him promise not to blame his son, my nephew. I told my brother not to blame his son for taking the tape, as we did similar things in our youth with magazines while searching for temporary housing. I stayed with my close friend Russell, with whom I had a strong friendship from our previous work together. Throughout this time, I sought a divorce lawyer, attending consultations at Cantor's every day for a week. Eventually, I found a suitable lawyer and explained my situation to him. I emphasized the need to legally conduct a DNA test on my daughter without my wife's consent. She clearly expressed her unwillingness for the test. It became a stressful process that required a judge's intervention to compel my wife to agree to a DNA test. Interestingly, initially, the judge rejected our request, pointing out my prior signature on the birth certificate. The details of the conversation between my lawyer and the judge, held behind closed doors, remained unknown to me. Nevertheless, my lawyer persuaded the judge to change his decision, and fortunately, the judge granted permission for the test. We underwent the test, and when the results arrived, it confirmed that the child was not biologically mine. Despite my wife's insistence that the result was false, we repeated the test to confirm the results. As a representative, I had to cover the costs. Once again, I informed her family about my decision to divorce their daughter, revealing that she was already pregnant before our marriage due to her deceit. This rushed wedding was a result of her deception, as she had lied about many things. After sharing the DNA test results and the truth, I left. Consequently, we discovered that the real father of the child is Frankie, a close friend of my wife and our neighbor. This revelation led to a serious quarrel between Frankie and my wife. When she moved in with me, I was unaware of her previous affair with our neighbor's boyfriend. Later, she learned about her pregnancy from this guy and did everything to get me to marry her. Despite the deception, she continued to maintain a friendly appearance towards her friend. The woman I married turned out to be genuinely deceitful. I recently received official notification that our divorce is finalized. On the same day, my ex-wife contacted me and proposed to meet and talk. Curious, I agreed to the meeting, understanding her intentions immediately. With a broad smile, I asked about her daughter's father, leaving her confused. We both knew that one mistake could ruin a marriage. I emphasized that even one wrong step might be enough to ruin my love and marriage. Continuing the conversation, she admitted being very upset that her parents didn't want to communicate with her. She expressed concerns about raising the child alone, to which I replied with a simple, "It's her own fault." I wished her luck and quickly ended the conversation. It seemed absurd to me that she expected me to be with her again, but I didn't want anything to do with her. I felt sorry for the child who was blameless in the situation. It's been about 2 years, and I'm raising a daughter alone who is not biologically mine. It might seem strange and foolish that I'm raising someone else's child, but I had no choice as my ex-wife abandoned the child and ran away with her new lover after our divorce. Following our separation, she faced depression, initially turning to drinks and later resorting to illegal medicaments. Now she lives in dire conditions with a man who has a history of arrests for theft and substance misuse. I took custody of my daughter and later adopted her, stripping my ex-wife of parental rights. I am sure of one thing: life will hold her accountable for what she did to me and for abandoning her daughter.